Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on history of India from 1700 to 1950, today we will talk about the nature of the revolt of 1857. In the earlier discussion on the causes and the consequences of the revolt of 1857, we talked about the various economic, social, political causes, military and the immediate cause we also talked about. And in the context of the nature of the revolt of 1857, we find that it has been seen variously by the scholars in different contexts. If we see the imperialist scholars, they treated it as a sepoy mutiny in the initial part, and with V.D. Savarkar we find that it was seen as the first war of independence. Some others, they have seen it as some sort of a conspiracy, and others, they have tried to see it in a framework of some kind of a war between the blacks and the whites, and how these kinds of negations, they have also come with regard to the revolt of 1857. And these various interpretations, they have taken recourse to various kinds of source material, and they have also added their own ideas with regard to terming the revolt of 1857. So in the course of our discussion, we will talk about these various historical interpretations by the historians and what is the basis on which they have in a way tried to categorize them. In the framework of the readings, one can see P.C. Joshi's Rebellion 1857, a symposium, V.D. Savarkar, The Indian War of Independence, Vishnu Bhatt Godse's Memoir of 1857 Rebellion, Majha Pravas, which was originally in Marathi and translated by Shanta Gokhale and Priya Darkar, Adventures of a Brahmin Priest. Vismayapati edited 1857 Rebellion, and Shekhar Bandyopadhyay from Palasi to Partition, A History of Modern India, and source material from IGNOU as well as NCERT can also be referred with regard to the nature of the revolt of 1857. So we find that how these kinds of references, they try to give you a kind of a picture with regard to the nature of the revolt. And as we have seen the imperialist historiography, it talks about the revolt of 1857 in the framework of a sepoy mutiny, and they say that the way the revolt of 1857 unfolded, we do not find any kind of a nationalist feeling or idea among the masses, and only the sepoys from certain regiments, they in a way revolted because of their own personal grievances. And we find that even the issue of the greased cartridges in that way, that how when the greased cartridges, they were being introduced to the new Enfield rifles, we find that how both Hindus and the Muslims, because of the usage of the pig and the cow fat in the cartridges, they in a way revolted because they felt that they are going to lose their religion. And when we talk about the various kinds of sources, we see that the colonial sources, they are largely biased in nature, and indigenous sources, they are oral and popular history like folk song, folk tales, etc. And little attempt to understand the thoughts and actions of the thousands of the ordinary non-elite villagers who rose on considerable scale has been done in that sense. So in the context of these sources, we find that colonial sources, they have tried to undermine the revolt of 1857. They just wanted to restrict it to some sort of a mutiny. And on the other hand, we find that Indians, they did not write much in the context of the revolt of 1857 at that point of time. And the oral and the popular history like folk song, folk tales which exist, they tried to communicate a story which was different from the story which has been communicated by the British. And we also have to see that how so many people, especially the ordinary non-elite villagers, they rose in revolt against the British. So their stories, they have not been covered by the official or the British sources, because they are largely confined to their own framework, where they just want to prove that it was just a mere sepoy mutiny. We also see that some of the Indian sources, for that matter Majha Pravas we talked about, where we find that Brahmin priest who travelled from Maharashtra to this region, and how this kind of a text which was written by him later. So it is seen as some sort of a contemporary account, and he was also some sort of a witness to the fall of Jhansi, and it is being narrated that he was able to meet the Rani of Jhansi as well at that point of time. And when you talk about such kind of sources which are regional in nature in that sense, because it was written in Marathi and later it was being translated, and we find that such kind of sources, they have been very rare. And on the other hand, the archival records, they largely speak of the official accounts of the British, and all of them they try to convey in a certain manner, whether it was Holmes or Kai, Roberts, etc. All of them, they see it in the framework of a mutiny. And they also in a way argue that it was not patriotic in nature, and it was selfish in nature, and it was lacking native leadership and lacking also popular support, as John Seeley has argued as well. And when we talk about these kinds of historians, those who have some kind of a bias towards India in that sense, because they try to in a way communicate that the British civilization or the European civilization was far more developed or far more civilized, and it was being in a way compared with the barbaric civilization in the framework of India. So scholars like Holmes, they in a way argue that it was a conflict between the civilization and barbarism. So these kinds of approaches, they in a way try to communicate the idea of racialism, and we see that how British, they perpetrated the kind of violence in India, so they could hardly be seen as in some way that they were civilized in nature. And if it was just mere a sepoy mutiny, then how British, they were alarmed by the popular character of the revolt, and they in a way communicated that it was a mere infection or a disease that is spread from one area to another. So when we find that scholars, those who have countered these kinds of claims which have been made by the British by restricting it to only a sepoy mutiny, we find that when we see the turn of the events and how the events, they were unfolding, and the way mutiny spread rapidly in different areas, and so why the commoners, they were being in a way rose against the British, and how later we also find that these commoners, they were being punished by the British rulers. So if these civilians, they were being punished, so if it was just a sepoy insurrection, there was no need to punish the ordinary citizens. And Talmaiz Khaldun has talked about this kind of aspect, where we find that villagers and even common ordinary citizens in the cities, or towns, they were being punished by the colonial rulers at that point of time. So this in a way gives credence to the view that it was more than a sepoy mutiny. It was a popular war in that sense, where people from different sections of the society, they participated in large numbers. And we also see that how the people like Sayyid Ahmad Khan, who wrote Asbab-e-Baghawat-e-Hind in 1858, talks about the causes of the revolt of 1857, and how it focuses on the discontent at various levels. And he was a government employee at that point of time, and he talked about the various causes of the revolt of 1857. When we talk about other scholars like James Outram and W. Taylor, we find that it was a result of Hindu-Muslim conspiracy. So some scholars, they have also tried to see the revolt of 1857 in this particular framework, and so they just do not want to agree to the popular character of the revolt of 1857 in terms of the participation of the people in the large numbers. So Mollison, for example, talks about revolt, and he says that it occurred as a result of premeditated design at the level of leadership outside and above the sepoy regiments. And on the other hand, we talks about S.N. Sen, who says that the revolt was not pre-planned, and the origins of the revolt were in sepoy discontent, and it derived its strength from the disaffection among the civil population. So scholars, they have their varying kinds of ideas with regard to the revolt of 1857, and the various kinds of views which have been forwarded by the historians. We find that many of them, when they talk about the conspiracy angle, we find that they are trying to deny it a popular character. And scholars like Esensen, as I've told you, that they in a way argue or in a way counter those earlier kinds of interpretations and say that revolt was not pre-planned in nature. And we find that the sepoy discontent, it provided the kind of origins which were there, and how the civilian population, it also came in support of the sepoys, and civilian population also participated in large numbers in the revolt of 1857. Scholars, those who have seen it from a different angle, one is Karl Marx, and he has argued that in truth it was a national revolt. And Benjamin Disraeli, a contemporary conservative leader in England, called it as a national rising. So we find that even people, those who were not living in India at that point of time, those who had read about it, Karl Marx and even Benjamin Disraeli, they also in a way saw it as some sort of a national rising. So this attempt of the imperialist historiography to see the revolt of 1857 as only some sort of a sepoy mutiny was very deliberate in nature, so that they are in a way trying to communicate that Indians, they did not counter the British rule in 1857, and whatever concerns which were being raised by a section of society, sepoys for that matter initially, and how different sections of the society, they collaborated with the sepoys, and when they collaborated with them, and how the civil population also came into the picture. And as late as the early part of the 20th century, we find that this idea of the War of Independence was not being talked about, and V.D. Savarkar described it as a planned war of national independence guided by the nationalist principles of Swaraj and Swadharma. So 1857 revolt talks about the idea of Swaraj, that how Indians, they were to be guided by themselves. They did not want any kind of a colonial power to guide them. And Swadharma again was very important in the sense that how British, they were trying to in a way defile the religions of the Indians by introducing the greased cartridges, how they were giving some sort of a support to the missionary activities, where we find that the people, they were being in a way allowed to be converted to Christianity, and all sorts of incentives they were being given to the people in terms of conversion as well. And these incentives, they were also being in a way promoted by the colonial rulers. So the revolt of 1857 was trying to question all this with the idea of Swaraj as well as Swadharma, where the own religion was to be followed. We also see that other scholars, they talk about both the civil and the military character of the revolt. For example, S.B. Chaudhary, and they call it the rising of the people as well. And definitely when one is trying to see that how sepoys, they struck the first blow, but they did not produce the leadership which was necessary to channelize the activities of the rebellion groups. So some of the civil elements, they assumed the leadership of the movement and used this to their own advantage. So in this sense, we find that how the civil and the military character of the revolt was there at that point of time, and not only the military factors they were important, rather the civil factor was also important in the context of the revolt of 1857. And we see that how during this particular time, at this point of time, we see that how the military factor, it merged with the civil factor as well. So scholars like S.B. Chaudhary, as has been argued, they talk about it was the first combined attempt of many classes of people to challenge foreign power. And we also see that it can be freedom movement of a later age as well. And other scholars like Thomas Metcalfe has argued that it was something more than a sepoy mutiny, but something less than a national revolt. So various interpretations of the movement or the revolt of 1857 as some sort of an initiation of a freedom movement have been made by different scholars, and we find that these scholars, they have tried to in a way communicate. For example, Thomas Metcalfe, as has been argued, that he tries to consider it as some sort of more than a sepoy mutiny, but at the same time he is also restricting himself, where he says that it was something less than a national revolt. So these kinds of interpretations, they are in a way are trying to see the revolt of 1857 in a different manner. And we also realize that when people and the military forces, both of them, they came together to challenge a foreign power. So the political aspiration or the political idea was there, because they wanted to overthrow the British rule. So such kind of concerns, they also have been talked about by the various scholars, those who have tried to study the revolt of 1857 and its nature. And we find that when we talk about these kinds of approaches, for example, Christopher Bailey talks about the Indian Rebellion of 1857, that it was not one movement, it was many, citing the differing reasons for revolt by different sections as shown by Eric Stokes. But it can also be argued that but being many does not take away credit away from the revolt of 1857, but shows the unpopularity of British among all sections of the society. So we find that even the revisionist historians like Christopher Bailey, they in a way try to divide the revolt of 1857 in that manner, where they are trying to cite the various kinds of reasons in the revolt of 1857, where the different sections, they were in a way participated in the revolt of 1857 for their own reasons. But one has to also realize that despite this fact, that how differing sections, they were in a way participating for their own reasons, it does not take away any credit from the revolt of 1857 or its participants. Rather, the unpopularity of the British among the various sections of the society is highlighted when we talk about these kinds of aspects. We also see that in the revolt of 1857, there is a distaste for the British state and the disruptions it brought into the lives of the people. And we find that anything which stood for the authority of the East India Company became the target of attack of the rebels. And they also felt that their caste and religion was also under the attack from the British, and they were fighting for their deen, faith and dharma, religion. So in a way, to restore moral order which was polluted by an intruding foreign rule. So we find that the people, those who were participating in the revolt of 1857, they were very well aware about their own dharma and how this kind of a threat to their dharma by the British, by intruding upon the various practices which were being followed by the Hindus and Muslims in India. So they considered it as a British threat, and British they in a way enacted a number of measures with which they wanted to convert people, and how people, those who were converted, they would get their own property in that sense, because they introduced such kind of acts as well, apart from providing a lot of support to the missionary activities. And scholars, they also have seen that Gautam Badra, for example, talks about that it was the perception and the day-to-day experience of the authority of the alien state in his immediate surroundings that determined the rebels' actions. And rebels, they were unknown to each other and separated by their different experiences. They were pitted against the same enemy at the same historical conjunction. So we find that how the day-to-day experience of the authority of the alien state was an important concern at that point of time. And we also see that not everyone participated in the revolt of 1857. So many sections of the society, some of the regions, they did not at all participate in the revolt, and some of them even actively supported the British in quelling the revolt of 1857. So the profession of the loyalty by the Calcutta intelligentsia was also not without dilemma, as they too were feeling what Hindu Patriot, that newspaper, described: grievances inseparable from subjection to a foreign rule. And this loyalty also, as Hindu Patriot talked about, springs nearer from head than from heart. So these kinds of concerns, they were also being raised in the newspapers of those times. They were also talking about these kinds of concerns of that particular period. And we find that scholars, they have tried to unearth the various kinds of details with regard to the revolt of 1857, and then they have tried to position their ideas concerning the revolt of 1857. And scholars like Judith Brown, they say that during the revolt, feudal elements were the decision makers, and much of the revolt was determined and shaped by the presence or absence of a thriving magnet element committed to the British rule, for they could give revolt a general direction. And Eric Stokes has also argued that the rural revolt in 1857 was essentially elitist in character. So in that sense, we find that how the issue of elitism was important in the context of the revolt of 1857, and how the feudal elements or the elite elements, many of them, they also sided with the British. And we find that if the support of the elitist elements could have been to the revolt of 1857, and then it would have been a success. And on the other hand, they have also tried to see that the revolt of 1857 was essentially elitist in character, that the people, those who were participating in the revolt, these people, they were elite in nature. So there is a lot of a dichotomy with regard to these kinds of views which have been expressed by Judith Brown, where we find that Lord Canning in a way acknowledged in 1857 after the revolt that how the elitist elements, the zamindars and the princely estates, they acted as breakwaters in the storm of 1857. So when you talk about that the revolt was elitist in nature, then this kind of a proposition does not hold ground. Then we find that how the people from the rural setup, the people from the popular setup, they were also participants in the revolt of 1857. So scholars like Sumit Sarkar, they have argued that the modern Indian history has both the elitist and the populist trends, and the revolt of 1857 was no exception as well. And the elitist position trivializes the role of the masses in this context, and he argued that the feudal lords were reluctant to assume leadership and were pushed by rebels. So these kinds of arguments, they have also been given by the scholars, that when we tend to understand Indian history, we find that both the trends, they are there. And in that context, 1857 revolt also finds that both these kinds of trends, talking about the populist as well as the elitist, they have been given. And we also see that how when one is trying to see the revolt of 1857 as an elitist one, then it in a way try to negate the role of the masses, those who were large in number in the revolt of 1857. And it has also been argued that many of the feudal lords, they were reluctant to assume the leadership of the revolt, and they were being pushed by the rebels. So it might have happened in certain cases, but it does not mean that the will was not there, but the kind of support which they got from the various sections of the society, they also in a way motivated these leaders to in a way fight against the British. So we'll talk about some of the other concerns which have been raised by the historians, the kind of views which have been propagated by them in that sense with regard to the nature of the revolt of 1857 in our next lecture. Thank you very much.